Aw Yeah Comics celebrates everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations, Harrison, New York, Muncie, Indiana, or Skokie, Illinois, home to our pal, Sweet Sweet Bernie. If you have children and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow them on social media. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. Fat Moose Comics, established in 1982, is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Led by current owner Sean Hendricks, Moose has that rare, old-school comic shop feel and camaraderie, yet also remains a welcoming space for new fans. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you are in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. This week, I speak to legendary writer Mark Waid about his Superboy starring Action Comics run, as well as his other Superman-related DC projects. You'll hear that conversation very shortly. But first, joining me to set the stage is returning guest Josh Marowitz. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure. You're actually going to be back here next week as well for a very fun episode we're calling Dear DC, a Superman Collected Edition wish list. I am very excited to record that.
I'm very excited too. We're going to manifest some collected editions.
That's the goal. So everyone, make sure you come back and listen to that next week. But I'm so honored and excited to be able to present another interview with Mark Waid. I know you and I are both big fans of his work, and it was wonderful to have the opportunity to speak to him again. Time was slightly limited, but I still ended up getting about 45 minutes with him, which people will hear in just a few moments. But I thought it would be helpful to do these wraparound segments to kind of set it up and then to unpack a little bit of the interview after. So let me toss it to you first. Fandom aside, because I know you are a fan of his work and you've read a lot of Mark Waid stuff, but you've also met the man, yeah?
Yeah, I've met him a few times. I first met him in Baltimore, at Baltimore Comic-Con. Gosh, it must have been 2012, 2013, somewhere around there. And I had heard that Waid was, the foremost Superman scholar in the whole world, knows Superman's social security number, knows all sorts of things that nobody else does. And so I had one loaded in my pocket, a trivia question for him. I am a huge Seinfeld fan. In fact, I come to Superman from Seinfeld. I so badly wanted to be like Jerry Seinfeld when I was in 7th grade that I thought, well, he likes Superman. Let me like Superman. Let's see what this is all about. And so I was reading the first appearance of Mon-El, and Jonathan calls Mon-El or says, hey, we need to give you a secret identity. What about Bob Cobb? And Bob Cobb, as Seinfeld fans know, in Seinfeld is Maestro. And they make a whole big fuss. Oh, don't call him Bob. He goes by Maestro. And so I thought that was kind of funny. And I remembered that. And so I said to Waid when I met him, I said, I know you're a big Superman trivia guy. I know that you like to be challenged with trivia. Do you know what the name was that Jonathan suggested for Mon-El? And immediately, oh, Bob Cobb, he said. And I said, oh, yeah, that was it. And he goes, hey, and in that same issue, how much change was in Lana Lang's purse? And I said, I don't know, $5? He goes, no, it was 77 cents. And then I looked it up later. Yeah, of course it was 77 cents. I don't know why I had to look it up. Mark Waid said it was. So I said, oh, okay, you got me there, Mark Waid. And he was real nice. He signed all my copies of Birthright. And so now a month later, maybe 2 months later, he came to a show in Greensboro, North Carolina, a real small show for a guy like Mark Waid, I would have thought, but there he was. And so I went up to his table with, I think, was it Action 740 or somewhere around there, a Superman Blue issue that he actually wrote. And that thrilled me when I realized that. I went up to his table. I said, hey, Mark, I don't know if you remember me from a few months back. I just met you. We talked about Bob Cobb and the change in Lana Lang's purse. And before I could even say anything else, he goes, oh, I got a question for you. I said, oh, okay. He said, before Smallville was established as being set in Kansas, what state was it in? I said, oh, I don't know. He said, it was Iowa. And I said, really? He said, yeah. And the way I know that is that in the radio show, they mention that there's the Smallville is so many miles away from such and such a town. So I got out a big map and I figured out, based on that description, where Smallville must be. And I said, oh, he said, yeah. And I was driving across the country once and I thought, oh gosh, do I have 5 or 6 hours to drive down to the site of Smallville? There's nothing there. It's just a big field. But I just wanted to see where Smallville was supposed to be in the radio show. And I said, oh, did you go? And he goes, no, I decided I didn't have the 5 or 6 hours. And so like, here's Mark Waid. Like, he's not going to not go to an empty field because it is an empty field. He just didn't have the time to go to the empty field. And I thought, oh gosh, that's dedication to Superman lore, to be able to say you saw the empty field, or to even say you wanted to see the empty field where Smallville was supposed to be set. So then, I don't know how many years after this, I see Mark Waid again at Heroes Con in North Carolina, where I go every year. And he said, I went up to him and I said, hey, Mark, in the past we've had a few trivia questions back and forth. That I have one for you tonight or today. I saw him in the daytime. And he said, okay, hit me. I said, what was the tough, what do you call it? The crook, the mobster who kidnaps Lois in Action Comics #1. And he said, oh, it was it? And he's like struggling here. And I thought, oh, well, I've got Mark Waid on the ropes. And he didn't come up with Butch Matson, but he came up with something so close that he knew it. He just couldn't produce the words there on the spot. So I gave it to him and I said, okay, well, you got that one. What was the address, I said, where Superman went to beat up the wife beater in Action Comics #1, which is 211 Court Avenue. And he didn't know that one. Couldn't even like guess. And so I got him in a trivia contest. Well, I guess it wasn't really a contest. It was really a one-sided affair there. But then I kind of broke my own heart. Like I kind of like disproved Santa Claus for myself. Like, why did I want him to not know an answer? What was I trying to accomplish there? I thought in that moment, as I was like panicked that I had like broken him somehow. And actually, you know what? He's not been back to North Carolina since then.
Yeah,
do I feel responsible?
Yeah, I think you might be to blame.
I think that he's avoiding me. That's what I think.
That's amazing. Well, I guess that's an instance of be careful what you wish for.
Yes.
It's amazing. I was not expecting an impression, but boy, did you channel him. I feel like if you ever want to get into a little side gig, maybe doing do a stand-up set after hours, after a comic book convention. I mean, it's a very specific audience that this would be for.
It's a very specific audience.
Do you have any other, you don't have to do them, but do you have any other creator impressions in your repertoire?
I don't have any creator impressions, but back in Obama's presidency, I did a pretty good Obama.
Okay.
And now it's been long enough that I don't hear him enough.
No, that's amazing. I love that anecdote. I appreciate you sharing it. And it's one of those things, I am not at all shocked that he knew Bob Cobb. I feel like you're a Silver Age guy and you're reading Superman, those Superboy stories with mine. That's something that would really, it stuck out to me when I read these for the first time now. So I'm sure, especially growing up with it, but the amount of change in her purse takes it to another level. Like that's the sort of thing I have never had, nor do I think I ever would have or would try to cultivate, that level of encyclopedic knowledge and trivia, that's never been my thing. I admire it, and it's neat to see it in others, but yeah, that's not been me.
Well, you're pretty encyclopedic. Well, I don't know if I would call it encyclopedic, but when you're able to summarize an issue of something that you've read, and like last time I was here and we talked about some of those issues of Adventures of Superman, I was like, I didn't get the point, and you're like, well, and the way you just laid it out, like you had written it.
Oh.
Like you knew that story well enough to boil it down to the necessary parts that I needed to make the connection that I wasn't making.
No, I appreciate that. Not to toot my own horn, but I was proud of myself recently when we covered the Joe Kelly run on JLA, and I laid out the beats of Obsidian Age, which is not an easy story.
No, it is not.
I think we kind of encapsulated this. But yeah, I guess it's more, the trivia aspect of it, like the amount of change in the purse. Like that's not something that I think would ever really register with me. But no, that's awesome. Look, I don't think we really need to sell people on this interview. Hopefully people are looking forward to it, but you have actually had the opportunity to listen to it. I guess just kind of big picture, anything you want to say to folks before we segue into it?
Well, I was glad that he said a few things that set my mind at ease about what was coming in his action run. Because I read that first issue, and it was a good issue on its own, but here I am as a fellow post-crisis Superman kid, and I'm thinking like, oh, but this ruins all these things that I love about post-crisis. And a lot of what he said, I thought, oh, okay, he gets it. He's going to take care of this. I feel a whole lot better about some of the changes that I was worried about that aren't really going to be changes.
Good. As was I, to be honest. Now, I do want to give a shout out to a bunch of our patrons, because I did put the call out if anyone had questions for Mark Waid. And one of them, shout out to Brian, made it into the episode early on. People will hear that very shortly. We had questions from Chase and Duncan that were sort of baked into the questions that I was already asking. But we did have a few other submissions that just due to time, I wasn't able to hit explicitly. But I do want to give a shout out to Scott, Kay, Jan, Eric, Rick, and Logan. Always appreciate the questions and the interest. So we'll get into the interview. After that, you and I will be back. We'll have some follow-ups, things that stood out to us from the conversation with Mark. We'll talk about the Summer of Superman special a little bit. This will be a good opportunity for that. I'll welcome your thoughts on Action Comics 1087, the beginning of this Superboy starring run. And I guess at this point, without further ado, my conversation with Mark Waid. Mark Waid, welcome back to Digging for Kryptonite, sir.
Good to be back, sir.
You were the first creator I interviewed on this podcast way back in winter 2021, and you're the first creator to return. So I'm really very honored to have you here.
I take that as an honor. All right.
Now, I was reflecting on that interview we did back then, and we recorded in February 2021, and that was really at the very beginning of what has become this Mark Waid renaissance at DC. And it's one of those things where it's amazing to see. And as a fan, I really had thought the Mark Waid at DC ship had sailed. And I'm so glad to be proven wrong. I'm curious, from your perspective, did you similarly feel like the ship had sailed? Or did you always kind of think when the tide at DC turns, an opportunity might arise again?
I had in the back of my mind, at some point there will be a managerial change, and at which point, I and a bunch of other creators from the 90s and the aughts that have sort of been blackballed will be let back in. And that's the way it turned out. And I couldn't be happier.
Yeah. Like I said, it's been amazing to see, given how much I enjoy your work and given how much I know you love Superman and these other characters. And in terms of your current, recently completed, and forthcoming projects, we have the Superboy starring Action Comics, Justice League Unlimited, World's Finest, Batman and Robin Year One, Last Days of Lex Luthor, New History of the DCU. So my next question is something that you've probably gotten in various forms, but I'll share a quick anecdote. My dear friend, Rich Roney, who's probably the biggest Mark Waid fan I know.
I love that guy. Okay. I don't even know him, but I love him.
We'll usually have a phone call when the new DC solicitations come out each month. Mm-hmm. And a very common refrain, like clockwork from Rich, is, how is Mark Waid writing so much?
That is a great question. I wish I had an answer for him, but I'm like the coyote in the Roadrunner cartoons. If I look down, I'm going to fall. I'm just going to plummet off the cliff. So I just got to keep walking forward. And and be fueled by the fact that I love these characters and I love the opportunities I've been given with them. And DC's been great about letting me do pretty much whatever I feel like doing. So I can't let that opportunity slide. And I'm going to keep working this hard as long as I possibly can.
That's what I typically say to him, not to speak for you, but I always say to him, I'm like, he loves these characters so much
Yeah.
that I'm sure that really fuels a lot of it. But I guess a more practical question that I had for you, just in terms of your writing process and procedure, what sort of pace are you keeping? Is it like a script a week? Is it more frequent? Are you jumping back and forth between scripts, or do you sort of write one all the way through and then move on?
All of those things. It's a lot of it is dependent upon how fast the artist is and trying to make sure that the artist I may not always be able to turn in an entire script at once, but I will always make sure that the artist has pages because that's part of my responsibility as it is his part of the responsibility or her part of the responsibility to make sure that the inker has pages, that the inker has to make sure the colorist has pages. That's the deal. I mean, if you leave somebody without work for a day or two, that's food off their table. So I'm constantly spinning plates. Um, but it all seems to work out in the end. And a lot of the time, my focus goes to, less, here's what's technically up next on the deadlines. And it goes more towards, okay, who's going to need work faster? Is it Adrian? Is it Dan Mora? Who's next up? So that's the way it works. And then in between, I squeeze in History of the DC Universe, and it's a full life, trust me.
I can imagine. I do want to ask you more about your artistic collaborators a little later, but in terms of other people you work with, I want to hit on your editor, Paul Kaminsky, who has been on the show recently, and I asked him about working with you, and he had lovely things to say. And I guess I wanted to get your perspective on what that dynamic is like and sort of what makes for a good writer-editor relationship. Because I think from the fan
Right.
perspective, sometimes fans might look at editorial in terms of potential interference, them saying no, whatever the case may be. But I'm sure
Right.
with a good editor, it's a beautiful thing. So I would love to get your perspective.
Sure. I mean, and fans do think that way if they think of editors at all. Sometimes it's just invisible to them. So, uh, I've known Paul since my Archie days, and I am really blessed to have him as an editor. He and I tend to be on the same wavelength about the stuff we're get excited about. And he's not afraid to push back if something doesn't make sense to him, or if the exposition is reading a little clunky, or what have you. He never says no. He's just a matter of, how can we massage this and make this work? It's tricky, especially with Justice League Unlimited, because that ties the rest of the entire DC universe together. So we're constantly having to skirt continuity issues and be flexible in terms of who our cast is. And he's great about letting me know. He and Marquise, his assistant, and Chris Rosa, who's the assistant on some of the other books, and they're all terrific people to work with. And that's what you need as an editor, is someone who will pretty much let you have your head, but is there with guardrails in case you need them.
Gotcha. I guess one last big picture writing question. So we've talked a lot on this podcast over the years about the work of Grant Morrison. And one of the ideas that we always kind of land on is that whether Morrison is writing Superman in JLA and 1 Million, or All-Star Superman, or Final Crisis, or the New 52, in a spiritual sense, if not a strict continuity sense, it feels like Grant is writing the same Superman, and you can kind of
Yes.
look at all of the work together as sort of this spiritual mega arc. And in going back very recently in preparation for this, through especially your recent output at DC and looking at Phantoms and the beginning of your new Action Comics run and Last Days of Lex Luthor, I get a similar sense from you. Is that kind of how you approach it when you're writing Superman, regardless of whether we're in a different continuity or not?
Yeah. I mean, to me, I know that character better than I know most everybody in my family. I know that character probably better than I know myself. And so it's easy for me. There's a consistency to his outlook. There's a consistency to his morals and ethics. And there's a consistency to his approach and to his kindness. And all of these things that make up Superman need to be present in every iteration, regardless if you're doing an Elseworlds or you're doing an alternate universe Superman or something like that. It feels to me like if those things aren't present, then it's not quite Superman.
Gotcha. So I want to plunge into Superboy because I have so many questions for you.
Sure.
There's one just sort of fun general audience question that one of our listeners submitted that I was curious to get your take on. This is from our pal Brian, who says, if I were to hire Mark Waid as an interior decorator for my Superman room, what items would he suggest I use in my decorating? Just curious what material objects Mr. Waid personally feels best represent Superman fandom.
That's a great question. I am lucky enough recently, by the way, to have found a huge comics fan with a 3D printer. It's the perfect combination. So right now in that museum upstairs, you've got the Brainiac ship, you have Superman's rocket, Supergirl's rocket, you have any number. I mean, it is just a Superman museum on my third floor. I finally, after years and years, finally took the plunge and bought those big, expensive lighted cabinets to put everything into. And God damn it, that thing is not a museum. I could just hang up there. I could hang out up there all day. So that's, if you're looking for like that sort of thing, here's the thing that I have that nobody else has. And it's a real deep cut, but in continuity, when Superboy finally left Smallville to go to college or to leave, whatever, the city, the town of Smallville had a huge party for him, and he made a gigantic cake for everyone in the town. And it's been established that a lot of people just took their piece of cake and kept it under glass forever as a souvenir. I have one of those pieces of cake under glass, and that's to me the quintessential Superboy souvenir.
That's amazing. And is that something that was 3D printed?
It was something that somebody made years ago on Etsy that by custom that they did a great job with.
Oh, that's really cool. Okay, so on the note of Superboy,
Mhm.
so as of this recording, the first issue of your new Action Comics run, issue 1087, just hit stands. I was fortunate DC was kind enough to send me an advance copy, so I got to read it early.
Great.
Loved it. And
Thank you.
here's the thing. When you were here last and we talked about Birthright at length,
Mhm.
you talked about how when you were writing Birthright, you would have had Clark be Superboy, but for the fact that you had to fit within existing continuity. When you said that,
Mhm.
inside I'm thinking to myself, whoa, we dodged a bullet. I'm glad we didn't have that because
Right.
at the time, right, child of the 90s, growing up in the post-crisis era, the idea of Clark as Superboy, very foreign to me. Give me Connor
Sure.
Kent all day. That's my guy.
Totally.
That's my Superboy.
I
But
totally understand.
Mark
Yes.
Waid, I have seen the light.
You've seen that guy. Great.
I have become such a fan of Clark as Superboy. We spent months on this podcast last year going through a great sampling of pre-crisis stories. We watched all the Filmation Superboy shorts, the black and white 1960s pilot, the 1988 to 92 live action series. We went through all of it. And I just came away from it with this appreciation for the stories themselves. They were fun. I enjoyed them. But more importantly, I recognized how additive the Superboy
Yes.
chapter was to the mythology.
It really is. And the way we're approaching it is that you don't get to see Superman become Superman in Superman comics. He's already Superman. And he can't, Superman is, he's already made all the mistakes he's going to make, all the big mistakes. He's already learned all the big lessons he has to learn. So the fun of doing Superboy is, okay, how do we get there? How did he start from scratch and build that identity? And the thing that works, I think, greatest to our advantage here is that our take, as you've seen, is that it's Clark's 15th birthday. They're on their way to Metropolis for a day trip. Uh, he's wearing the costume under his clothes, and Ma Ken is like, no, 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 no. We said 16. You were not to be wearing that suit in public until you turn 16, because and it's a legitimate reason. It's because there are a lot of things we got to figure out. As Pa says, a lot of people are going to be asking a lot of questions, and we have to make sure we have thought through all of them. And then sure enough, something happens in Metropolis that causes him to have to make his public debut. And now the Kents are on the back foot. And that's the runner throughout the whole series is how do we build this from scratch? We have a costume that's not even made out of baby blankets yet. They haven't even figured that much out yet. They haven't figured out the Clark Kent secret identity. They haven't figured out who and what Clark should be to disguise himself. They haven't figured out how to hide the fact that Superboy lives in Smallville. At least for now, they need to hide that. It's all of these things they've got to figure out, and they got to them out on the fly because now that Superboy has been public, the government wants to know stuff. The military wants to know stuff. There are secret factions that want to know who this new superhero is. So I like Superman as a kid on the back foot trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And here's the thing: when I kind of went through a lot of those pre-crisis stories, like I said, I enjoyed them; they were fun. But I also recognize the storytelling sensibilities and intended audience of the day. And so I don't say this to knock any of those stories, but at the same time, I came away kind of feeling like, boy, I would really love to see Clark as Superboy get a really proper modern spin with modern storytelling sensibilities, so you can really dig in a lot more.
Right. I mean, I love Superboy stories. I really do, of all eras, but we always wrote Superboy as if he were just a short Superman. And now we get a chance to differentiate a little bit. And like I said, watching him build that stuff. I mean, you'll see in the next couple of issues, he's wearing Converse for footwear because he hasn't even figured that part out yet. It's just we're inventing the costume on the fly. Everything is just patchwork until we get it all together.
Yeah. So one of the things I was so curious about is just how you got the green light for this, how much, if at all, of a battle it was, because in the entire time I've been alive as a Superman fan, with a very limited exception, and I would say the main exception would be in that post-Infinite Crisis landscape when Jeff Johns reintroduced the idea of Clark as Superboy in Secret Origin. He did his Legion trilogy, but even there, it was a Superboy who operated in secret. He was the suburban myth, whereas here we have a fully public-facing Superboy. So yeah, I mean, I'm just curious what the process was like to get this off the ground and why DC sort of felt like this was the time to do it.
Luckily, Jeff opened that door and cracked that door open. And we have the confluence of three people who were very enthusiastic about Superboy. Me, my editor, Paul, and Superman writer Josh Williamson, who also loves the idea of Superboy and the concept of Superboy. So it wasn't a battle in the sense that I pitched it and had to fight for it. It was, okay, this, it was Paul just sitting down with Josh and me and going, this is something we should explore. And part of that is because we all love the Legion of Superheroes, all of us. And we want to find a way back into that franchise somehow that makes sense. And I don't care how many iterations you've done with the Legion. And speaking of somebody who's had like 3 bites of that apple, if Superboy is not the foundation of it, the whole thing just kind of is built on shifting sand and doesn't feel like it's rock solid. So if you're going to have the Legion, you need a Superboy.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. And I guess one of the other things that I was struck by very pleasantly was the fact that this story is happening in the pages of Action Comics. Because as you may recall, I emailed you last year after I had my whole Superboy thing. And I was like, is there any possibility of doing something akin to what you're doing with Batman and Robin Year One with Clark as Superboy? But in my mind, I figured it would be a standalone thing, or maybe in the world's finest kind of corner of the DC universe. And so for this to be happening in Action Comics, I would have taken it wherever it was. But it was I just think like it's great to see how DC is really behind this idea.
Yeah, that was Paul's idea. And I love this. I love the fact that if we're launching a Superboy #1, yes, we'll get pretty high numbers on issue 1, but there will be attrition, as there always is with any new series. And it really is kind of a question of, at that point, okay, how long can Superboy last as a series? Action, we're going to be publishing forever. So it gives it a stable home. And as you say, it also sort of validates the concept that it is clearly a part of the Superman mythos that's not siloed off to the side or isn't a continuity question. No, it's Action Comics. That's where Superman was born. So that's the foundation of all of Superman publishing.
Now, the last time you were on Action Comics, not too long ago, it was for Phantoms, which was a set 12-issue storyline. Your current run, is this open-ended?
As far as I'm concerned, yeah. I mean, the readers will let me know otherwise, but I have years of stories we could tell.
And I don't know if you can say this part, but is the intention to stick with the Clark as Superboy for the run? Or is this, yeah. Oh man, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Oh, actually, speaking of Phantoms, I very much enjoyed that story and loved how you capture that bittersweet dynamic with Mon-El. There's something in Phantoms as well as Last Days of Lex Luthor, kind of looking at that overall approach. One thing that you kind of helped, I don't know, solve for me, the Bottle City of Kandor is another aspect of the mythology I think I've always bumped up against a little bit, just in terms of, does it not undermine a bit of the tragedy of Krypton's destruction? And for me, it's always been, as long as there's an element of separation, we're good.
Exactly.
And yes, there's a physical side, but what I feel like you really tapped into with those stories is the fact that the Kandorians have really deified Superman to the point where like he can't really walk among them and just kind of engage with them naturally. And there's also this cultural divide as well. So
yeah,
it's exactly what I was looking for. I don't really have a question, but I loved it.
No, thank you. I mean, I take these questions very, very seriously. And I think very, very hard about things like, okay, if there's a Bottle City of Kandor, why aren't you spending more time down there? What is that civilization like? I've done a whole, we haven't even seen it yet. I've just done a whole sort of term paper on how civilization in Kandor works, how your day-to-day life is in a sealed environment like that. So I feel like I know that place. But I will say that writing Last Days of Lex Luthor and stumbling across the idea that, yeah, they deify him to the point where Superman is just uncomfortable being there was a pleasant accident, and it's turned out well. And then, as you saw in Phantoms, now he's got a new problem, which is that the new science council, the new head of the science council, has barred him from Kandor, has exiled him, which is not something that weighs on him every single moment of the day, but is still, even though he is sort of remote from, as you said, there's a sort of a remote sense to Kandor that he doesn't really feel like that's where he belongs. It still stings.
Absolutely. And then one other key aspect from Phantoms that I just wanted to get your take on is, through time travel, we get this revelation that although Jor-El discovered the dimension known as the Phantom Zone, that essentially it was co-opted by the Science Council. And he wasn't Krypton's jailer. Is that something that had been on your kind of agenda for a while to address?
It has been. It has been for a long time because, look, again, I respect old continuity as much as anybody, but some of the stuff that we took for granted in the 1960s without questioning it doesn't hold up as well in modern times. And one of them is the Phantom Zone is a pretty horrific place to be exiled. You have only your consciousness. You have no tactile sensation. You might be able to get glimpses of other worlds or other civilizations from time to time, but it's not like sitting down and watching television. And I would consider it cruel and unusual punishment. And the idea that Jor-El was okay with this and was actively the guy putting people in the zone just sat weird with me. And the fact that Superman just blithely puts people in the zone sat worse with me, because since that time, since the 60s, we have gradually turned the Phantom Zone into a hellscape. It's no longer even a phantom zone. There's nothing phantom about it. It was just giant rocks and big monsters, and it was just another dimension that was absolutely brutal and hellish. And I can't wrap my head around the idea of Superman just blithely sending people there. Boom, boom, boom. So the object of Phantoms was to sort of retrofit this idea that Jor-El, as you say, invented the device that accesses it, discovers it, but it is co-opted by the Science Council as a prison. And also the point of Phantoms was to return the Phantom Zone to something that is more phantom-y, as it's in the name. So it also occurs to me, and I left this at the end of Phantoms for those who haven't read it, that one of the things that's missing from it as a prison, from Superman's point of view, would be the concept of redemption. That's what prison is supposed to be. It is supposed to be a place for reformation. And now we have put that mechanism in place with Candor and with Monel being sort of the parole officer, if you will, of the Phantom Zone. And not many people in the Phantom Zone are going to take advantage of that reformation, but that's not the point. The point is Superman needed to feel like there was a mechanism in place because he believes in the goodness of all people somewhere deep down in their soul.
Yeah, no, that was a great touch.
Thank you.
Jumping back to the Superboy side of things, one aspect that I really enjoyed in the first issue, I don't know if you're planning to utilize this device throughout, but the idea of adult Clark narrating.
Yes, that's going to be a standard. That's going to be a thing going forward.
I love it. I mean, as someone, of course, I watched The Wonder Years as a kid, but the show for me that really holds a special place is How I Met Your Mother. And obviously other stories as well. But that show is, I had that in my head, and just this idea of the adult version with the benefit of that perspective and that wisdom looking back. And it just adds another layer to it. That's great to hear.
Right. It also helps fill in blanks. Like at this point, Clark hasn't developed heat vision, for instance. There's a couple of powers he hasn't really developed yet. I can't really have him comment on that without knowing that these powers exist as Superboy. But readers will look at it and go, well, why didn't he use heat vision? Well, now we have adult Clark to help gloss that over. So that's a big help. Also, he can set up sort of ominous, here's something that's coming. I didn't know this was going to happen, but you'll see in a couple of issues what happens next. And I like that element of it too.
Absolutely. Another great touch. So I'm always there for it when we have the Kents and they're helping him sort out his powers and strategize. But the other thing, Pa Kent teaching him about the JSA and quizzing him on JSA history. Oh, love that.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Pop quiz. How did the Flash deal with a turtle back in 1941? It's half joking and half serious on Pa's Kent. He is, as my friends say, kidding on the square, if you will. He's joking, but there's some truth to it. And he wants Clark to be prepared. And Pa is a huge fan of that era of superheroes. He was not around during that time, but I wasn't around when Elvis was at his peak, and I'm still an Elvis fan. So that's your example. But it will also come in handy as we learn more about where some of these heroes were during this period. That Clark he's the only active superhero, but there are other players in the DC universe who are in the shadows who will be coming to light in the issues to come.
Okay, that's very intriguing. One of the things I wanted to run by you. So we've talked in the past about that Superman 2000 pitch that you were a part of back in the day. And I remember specifically there's a section about in that proposed revamp of a young Clark having been trained by the JSA.
Yes.
Was that you? Was that your?
I think that was either me or Mark Millar. And I don't want to go quite that deep with it because it does sort of undercut Superboy's importance. It does. We can't, because we collapsed all of these universe into one Earth. We can't have the JSA and still say Superman was the very first superhero. But what we can do is say he was the first of the new generation. And while there will be it's not like Hawkman and Green Lantern show up in Smallville to show him the ropes. That said, you're going to see in the coming issues that there is another long forgotten DC superhero who has been watching him on the sly and will come to the forefront, not necessarily to train him, but we'll see. There will be some interaction, and it may not be completely pleasant.
Gotcha. So we've talked about how this is a publicly known, public-facing Superboy. And it's funny because a couple of years ago, I wrote an article for our mutual friend, Dan Greenfield at 13th Dimension. And it was 13 questions, how you would build the perfect Superman origin. And I was so pleasantly surprised. You participated. You chimed in the comments and you went through all 13. And on the question about whether or not Clark should operate as Superboy, you wrote, I'm 100% down with a costume Superboy, though I'm not sure I'd want him to be much more than a local rumor.
Right.
So I'm curious along the way, how that shifted for you?
That shifted a little bit because it makes the stories a lot more limited if it's just, then we're just doing Smallville, the TV show. Um, I I think it's more interesting if he is out in the world, because that gives me another point of friction. It gives me another problem, which is eventually people are going to figure out that Smallville is his home base. But off the bat, they're working very hard to make sure that Superboy is showing up all over the globe so that no one quite yet pins him down to Smallville specifically. They'll figure it out, but I want there to be some mystery there,
Okay.
because it is harder to accept that Superboy and Clark Kent secret identity can't be found out in Smallville than it is in Metropolis. But part of that also is that we redid Smallville High. Smallville High has always been like, class of like 50 people. That's not how rural high schools work these days. I remember I went back to Tupelo, Mississippi, where I grew up in part, and I saw the high school. High school is the size of a junior college. And the reason is because in a rural setting, you're busing in kids from counties all over, and you're just consolidating the school into one place. And so Smallville High has, a couple of thousand students, if not more. So it's much easier for Superboy to hide his identity there.
Yeah, that definitely I think is an elegant way to approach it. Okay, so I feel like you're my therapist here with this next question, but
Yeah.
as much as I've come around on Clark as Superboy, and I really have, the one
Good.
aspect that I still struggle with is,
Mhm.
and I think this is informed by the stories I grew up with, Clark becoming Superman is always this sort of like threshold graduation level moment. And
Right.
if he's already publicly known as Superboy, and the thing is, I know there's a story that can do it, and possibly it will be the one that you're doing, but it's like, and I'm not even asking for spoilers, but just kind of your perspective on this. It's like, how do you still kind of preserve that big moment of him becoming Superman while he's already known as Superboy?
I think that, and again, I've not nailed this down yet, but in my mind, I don't mind following the birthright model, which is that Clark, after high school, travels the world, and there will be a reason why he decides to retire the costume for a little while he's doing his Clark Kent stuff, so that when he premieres back in Metropolis, it's not, oh, we've never ever seen this human being before in our lives, but it is, oh my God, he's back. After all these years of being vanished, he's back, and he's an adult, and he's badass.
Okay. Yeah, I think that solves it, because in the few instances that I found in pre-crisis comics where this was even really addressed, it was always pretty, I want to say perfunctory, but it was just sort of like, well, I'm Superman now. And I feel like,
I totally get it. I want there to be a big moment. That's why we gave him a big moment in Birthright. I really want him to have that big moment. And I also want Lois to be the one to coin the term. So as you will see next issue, I have done some fancy dancing around that. So.
Okay. Very cool. One of the things that's become a bit of a rallying cry on this podcast is justice for Pete Ross, because
yes.
Go for it.
Yeah. Pete Ross is one of the most noble characters in the Superman mythos, and he is long forgotten. For those of you just joining us, Pete's whole deal is that he learns Superboy's secret identity without Superboy knowing it. So rather than confronting his best friend Clark with this knowledge, he takes it upon himself to be Clark's sort of unwitting secret weapon. Whenever he sees that look in Clark's eyes that says, uh-oh, there's clearly some trouble somewhere, he's got to get away, that's the moment that Pete accidentally sets off the sprinkler system. Or that's the moment that Pete accidentally sets a fire in the wastebasket. Or that's what he does to draw the fire and draw the attention away. And Superboy doesn't know that he knows. And I love that dynamic. It makes Pete such a cool character and such a good friend.
Yeah. And I think that's the aspect of the character's history that really had been lost on me. And the view that I had of the character was much more limited. And then going back and reading those stories, and exactly to your point, he's this silent protector and helper. And it's amazing. Yes. And I do feel,
and he doesn't come to Clark, and he doesn't confront Clark with this, in part because he knows his friend, and he trusts his friend, and he knows Clark must have a good reason for keeping this secret. And also, he doesn't want to embarrass Clark by saying, "Hey, I figured it out." So all of these things make up Pete Ross. I cannot wait to dust Pete Ross off and show him off and make him cool again
That's
and
fantastic. I'm there for
and
it.
make him relevant. Yeah.
That's terrific. And you don't have to say whether or not you're planning to use these things, but I'm just curious, kind of other trappings of those pre-crisis, especially Silver Age Superboy stories. Like I just found the Smallville setting itself, I just found so charming, but the general store, the tunnels, the Clark and the red sweaters, things like that. I mean, it's just curious, like what of those things kind of speaks to you?
Right. I mean, all that stuff speaks to me, but I would say Clark and the Red Sweaters, probably not. There's an old conceit, and you know this from reading old Superman comics, but people don't know this. I they always colored Superboy or Clark in red sweaters and blue pants and a white shirt. It was really just because back when comics were considered just stuff for kids, it was a way of identifying the character instantly. It was like giving Clark his own uniform. The in continuity reason was that he had developed chemicals that made those clothes friction proof so that he could operate as Clark when he needed to, but they they always stained the clothing either red or blue, so that's why he had to wear those colors. I don't think that in the 21st century there are a lot of kids walking around with red sweaters and white shirts and neckties. So Skylar Patridge, who is doing an amazing job, he's got carte blanche to make the kids look like, of the era. So not the red sweater. Tunnel, yes, probably. General store, that one's tough too. I mean, that doesn't age well. If Pa were actually going to take a business in Smallville today, he'd probably be running a 7-Eleven, right? There are no general stores anymore because Walmart has wiped them all out. So what does that even look like? I don't think we're going to get to a point where we get off the farm because it's been such an integral part of the Superman mythos for so long. But no, I mean, however, it is certainly conceivable that Ma may pick up a part-time job working at like an antique store or something like that in town, because that gives another avenue to the stories. And also it underscores something that I also want to hit, which is that the Kents are not terribly well off. They're not poor, but neither are they rich. They're lower middle class. So every penny has to be counted on a farm. There's not a whole lot of money to be thrown around. And every time Clark comes back home with the suit and it needs another repair to it, Ma kind of rolls her eyes and like, geez, just be a little more careful out there. So there's not that, there's not that much to throw around. So that's something else that we have to get to play with is, okay, you can't use your powers for self-interest. You can't use your powers to make the Kent family rich. But why? I mean, if you were just a kid with a metal detector on the beach and you found a rare coin, that would be fair game. So what's the difference between that and Clark using his X-ray vision to find some gold bullion? There is a reason. And, it's going to be up to Pa and Ma to explain to him there's a difference there. And we can't use our power selflessly.
Absolutely. Yeah, you mentioned Skylar Patridge. The art's been terrific, so I'm glad.
Terrific. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought her up. I know I got to cut you loose. Do you have time for Last Days of Lex Luthor question?
Yeah, absolutely. You bet. I'm so proud of that thing. And I actually think at this moment in time, and my opinion may change with time, but I think right now that's the best thing I ever wrote.
It's one of those things. I enjoyed it. I was so happy to finally see it after all of those years. I'm hoping.
Too.
I don't even mean
8 years.
Yeah.
8 years, my friend.
Really?
Yes. Yeah. Since the time I sat down and wrote page 1, panel 1. Yeah.
Was it? I mean, I suppose the title maybe gives us away, but was the intention always for it to be as laser focused on the Clark Lex dynamic as it was, as opposed to, yeah.
Yes, totally. So, I mean, I freely admit I stole all this from Elliot Maggin, who was the preeminent Superman writer in the 1970s. But the idea that Clark and Lex were buddies growing up for a very short, buddies is a little strong term. Lex is mercurial. He doesn't hold Clark in the same esteem. he just holds them in a higher esteem than he does the rest of Smallville, where he considers them all cavemen. So I think that's an important thing. I love the tragedy of these are friends, and Superboy made one mistake as a kid. And if not for that mistake, it is entirely possible that Lex Luthor could have grown up to be, the greatest benefactor of mankind who ever existed. That's probably not true. There's a lot more to Lex than just Clark making that one mistake, but it's certainly in Superman's character to believe that to take on that responsibility, right? That I screwed it up. And that's what I really wanted to hone in on.
Yeah, I think what really resonated with me the most was how personal the quest was for Clark, and especially when you build to that moment of him revealing his identity to Lex, and you really feel and you see what's been motivating him. I have to say, one of the big surprises of this was it's called The Last Days of Lex Luthor, but by the time we get to the end of it, this also goes into the the category of a final Superman story as well.
It is, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's in the title. It's in the title. Yes.
Yeah. I will say I mean, I love the story. I still am wrestling a little bit in a good way, I think, with that final choice that Clark makes, the gamble that he takes, the amount of trust he places in Lex in the face of this threat from Brainiac. Mm-hmm. I don't even know what the question is, but I suppose just sort of your approach toward that moment.
The one thing that I hope doesn't get lost, and we worked on, there's one balloon where he explains why he took that gamble. And we worked on that for like weeks trying to get it exactly right. And I hope that the part that doesn't get lost is that for all of the reasons Clark is willing to take this gamble, one of the biggest ones is that he knows he is not smart enough to beat Brainiac at this point in the battle. He knows that Lex is, so he's willing to take that gamble. Because if he hadn't done that, story's over by page 12. It's done, and not in a good way.
It's funny. I think maybe I just didn't believe Clark in that moment when he said that. But no, that's fair. And I kind of wrestle with Clark's decision in that moment. But I think that's one of the fun things for me about engaging with these works and having these discussions. So I appreciate getting your perspective on it.
The trick is to always make sure your characters are making surprising and interesting decisions, surprising decisions. It's much harder with Superman, obviously, because we generally know what he's going to do. So this was an opportunity to do something that, is a little bit of a game. You don't see Superman gambling very much, but Superman takes this gamble.
Yeah. Yeah. And it speaks volumes about, where he is and where they are in that dynamic. So,
and how much faith he has in humans, even Lex.
Yes. So like I said, I know I got to cut you loose. I so appreciate your time. It's always a pleasure to get to speak with you. I know we've hit on a lot of what you have going on and what's coming up. Is anything else that you want to mention to folks?
Oh man. Okay. So World's Finest is still chugging along. There's a big 3-part Bizarro story coming up where we get to the cube world of Bizarros and do my deep dive on, okay, what is the geography and what are the physics of a world like this? I've done a lot of digging. It's not just a square world. If you build a square world, there are things that there are physics that are going to come into play that you're not prepared for. We've got Justice League Unlimited still rolling out. We have Batman and Robin Year One with Chris Samnee. We're closing in on the first year of that. Will there be a second year? Fingers crossed. But people like what we're doing. That's a good sign. And finally, the new history of the DC Universe, which is coming out in about a week and a half, 2 weeks. It comes out on the 25th of June. And people are unprepared. People who think especially the haters, especially the guys who are like, it's going to change in 2 months anyway. I mean, you can have that opinion, but why be that cynical? I think that once people see how incredibly comprehensive it is from start to finish, I think maybe that'll change people's tune. You were unprepared for how comprehensive it is because it's 30 pages of art and story up front, but it is a good 14 to 15 pages of back matter that is mostly text. That is the full timeline of the DC universe. Finally, here's the order in which stuff happened. Finally, you get the answers on who Hawkman is. You finally get the answers on Supergirl and did she die? Did she not die? Is Wonder Woman in the Justice Society? Is she not in the Justice Society? All that stuff we took very seriously into consideration. And hopefully, I guess I read an internet article this morning about here's 5 things that we hope that this thing accomplishes and clears up. And I was able to go down and go, yep, 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 yep. We clear all that stuff up. So I'm so proud of that thing, and I am really eager to see what people's response is going to be.
I'm very excited for it. And when I saw the announcement, I just thought to myself, well, if somebody's going to do this, it's Mark Waid's the guy.
I was going to burn that place to the ground if I wasn't the guy. Yes.
No, that's fantastic. I'm very much looking forward to that. Well, I thank you for your time. I thank you for all of your work, and especially for giving Clark as Superboy this modern spin. And I think for a lot of people, this will be an introduction, certainly for younger and newer readers. And that's a beautiful thing. And the last thing I just want to say is I was so happy for you when I saw your name on the street sign in the Superman movie.
Oh my God. That was such a great moment. It wasn't just a fleeting, sweeping glance. It's right there on the screen. It's quite the career arc from a kid whose love for Superman was mostly spurred by the Christopher Reeve movie to get to be a guy whose name is in the movie. That is so cool.
And well deserved. So thank you again so much for being here.
You bet. Take care, and we'll talk again sometime soon.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. You bet. Take care.
There's more episodes still to come with Josh Marowitz right after this break. My love of the TV series Smallville is well documented, and there's one rewatch podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring great insight, passion, and humor to each and every episode. And the podcast continues with more great Smallville and Superman talk now that their series rewatch has concluded. Listen wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On To banner, including Arrow, Star Wars, and more. We love digging into epic comic book runs, but what about the art of the single issue? Single Bound is a new podcast series hosted by married couple Amy and Logan as they review single issues of comics. And if the title also makes you think of Superman, you're not alone, as the Man of Steel is Logan's favorite character and a regular topic of discussion on Single Bound. Listen and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube, and follow the show on Instagram at Single Bound Podcast. We all love the big-budget superhero films, but the world of independent cinema remains a place of unbridled creative freedom and entrepreneurial spirit. Whether you're an independent filmmaker yourself, or you just love movies, don't miss these New Jersey film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, and Round Reel in Bloomfield. Submission information for filmmakers can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and much more. And I'm back with Josh. Welcome back.
Thanks.
All right. So now everyone has heard my interview with Mark Waid, so we can speak more specifically about it now. I have a few sort of follow-up items that I want to highlight, but let me toss it to you first. What do you want to share?
Well, one of the things I was most excited to hear was that he's going to have, Superman is going to have that premiere moment, that big, what do you call it? A graduation?
A threshold graduation level event. Yeah.
Yeah. Something like that. A puberty ceremony, if you will.
Sure.
Of premiering as Superman. So it's not just one day he's Superboy and, now, I woke up Tuesday and now I'm Superman. There's going to be a whole thing. And if what he says about being, going the birthright route and he goes off for a few years in the world and does a Clark Kent thing, great, because that's one of my favorite parts about Birthright, and I would like that to be baked back into the story.
Yeah, honestly, I'm 100% with you, and I think that's the way to do it. As he and I talked about, if you want to preserve the full moment of Superman's arrival, then that would almost certainly necessitate a Superboy, either no Superboy or a Superboy who acts in secret. But like he talked about, that would be rather limiting for the kinds of stories he wants to tell. So if we're in the realm of a public-facing Superboy, I think this idea that he teased of some sort of event that makes him hang up the cape for a period of time, So he goes away and he has that kind of globe-trotting, soul-searching journey like we saw in Birthright. And then he returns and he's a little bit older and you have the power of that debut. No, people aren't like, who is that? We've never seen him before, but there's still enough separation there where it's a big deal that he's back and he's Superman. I like that. That really put me at ease because that was, like I said, kind of the last hang up that I still had about Clark as Superboy.
And, you know, I was telling my friend Brooks about it, and he said, but if he's Superboy right now, how is Lois going to name him Superman? And then there's Mark in the interview saying, and I still want Lois to name him, and I'm going to have to do something about that. Great. I don't know if he's going to have Lois name Clark Superboy, but I kind of hope so, because it would seem like not as good an accomplishment if Superman shows back up and she's like, hey, it's Superman. That doesn't seem like quite enough credit to her.
Yes.
But whatever he's doing, he's thinking about it. He wants it to happen. I'm delighted because those were my two big hangups about that issue. And he's aware of both things and is working to make them right.
Definitely. Now, I didn't ask this partly for time, but also because clearly the decision has already been made. But one of the things that I have thought about a lot, and this has come up on the show in the past, to sort of help account for this, what we've been talking about, I always say to myself, could we not modify Superboy's costume somewhat? And I don't know exactly what that would look like. No cape or slight color variation, something such that in addition to, okay, he's been gone for a little while, he's a little bit older now, some other visual cue that, oh, okay, this is a different level. Obviously, that's not the way they went, and that's totally fine. But I always keep coming back to that because I feel like that might also help massage this issue for us a little bit as well.
That I hadn't thought of that. That's a good point.
I guess, there's actually one other thing that I've been kicking around because as well as I do, as well as many of our audience members, how Mark Waid generally feels about Jonathan and Martha Kent being alive into Clark's adulthood. Long story short, he's not a fan, right? And he's talked about it a lot in terms of those reasons why. But I was saying to myself, I wonder if part of the reason why Mark feels the way he does about the Kents is that he sees the Superboy stories as the more appropriate vehicle for them. And he grew up in a time where he got to see Clark with the Kents. It's just that it happened to be in the Superboy stories. Like, we grew up in a period of time, there were no Superboy stories. So when we hear him say like, oh, Jonathan and Martha shouldn't be alive in Clark's adulthood, well, to us, if they're not alive in his adulthood, we ain't seeing them anywhere. But I wonder
That's
for
true.
him if the perspective is different, because it's like, no, he spent a lot of time with the Kents. It was just in a different place or time. But you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I wonder how I would feel about the Kents being alive into his adulthood if I had grown up like Mark with that. And as you say that, the wheels in my head are turning, and I don't quite know yet where I would land on that.
Yeah. But I was just kicking that around. And not to speak for him, but yeah, I wonder if that's a little bit a part of the equation here. Oh, one other thing in that first issue of Action Comics, there is a reference to Clark's journalism books. I love this. Right? So it's not just this convenient job that allows him to be in the middle of the action. We see even from this young age, it's something he's studying. I was very happy to see that.
That was a nice touch. I like when Clark is intentionally a journalist and doesn't just show up one day, like in Superman 78. Did he take journalism classes during his 12-year Jor-El AI upload?
I mean, 12 years. I figure there has to have been some unit on journalism. I mean, 12 years is a long time.
I guess so. Is it an accreditation? Is it their degree? What I don't know. I liked that he's really making journalism a part of who Clark is even then.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And obviously we focus primarily on the Superboy of it all, but we did talk about some of Mark's other recent or upcoming or current projects. And I guess kind of along the lines of hearing something that sort of helped me come to terms with the story choice. I also talked to him about the last days of Lex Luthor and the decision that Clark makes at the climax of that story. And have you read that in full?
I have, yeah.
I guess real quick, how did you feel about the how that all turned out?
I was kind of disappointed because I knew it was a Black Label story, so I knew it wasn't like part of continuity, but I did want, at least by the end, for Superman to still be Superman. I did kind of hope for that. Um, so I was more disappointed in that part of it than I was disappointed in his choice to trust Lex with those stakes. Because yes, I guess if this were all reality, I would say to Superman, like, dude, what are you doing? You're taking that kind of gamble. But I know it's a story that Mark Waid is writing. And so I know that Superman's not really taking a gamble because the Mark Waid Superman already knows. He knows that he's making the right choice. He knows what's going to happen because Mark Waid knows what's going to happen. So I didn't see it quite as a gamble with the same stakes that you did.
Okay, no, that's fair. And the main thing that he kind of spoke about in that respect when I asked him about it was that line that Clark has to Lex about how I'm not smart enough to defeat Brainiac, right? You're the only one who can do this. And I guess, to be honest, I guess I didn't put enough stock in that line. When I read it and I remembered it, but I guess in my head, I didn't believe it. I didn't believe that was actually the case, or even if Clark believed it, that it wasn't actually the case. But hearing him talk about it and how important that one speech bubble was, like he said, I guess I need to take another look, and I will, and really kind of give that moment a little bit more consideration, because if it truly is the case that Clark couldn't beat Brainiac, he didn't have the wherewithal to do it, and believe that to be the case, that does smooth it over a little bit for me as well. So that's one of the many reasons why it was great to talk to him and get his perspective on it, because yeah, that definitely helped kind of solve that for me a little bit.
Good.
Yeah.
I hope that it's a story that'll be in print for many years because it looks beautiful. Even if, there are some story choices you can't 100% get behind or 100% wrap your head around. I don't love that he's not Superman at the end. You didn't love that gamble and without the real consideration of that one line. We get a little tour of the DC universe with Brian Hitch art, and who loves Superman more than these two guys? They really love it. I'm glad they got to do what they wanted, even if it took as long as it did.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I meant what I said to him, where even if there's something that I struggle with a little bit, the process of wrestling with it and having these conversations and thinking about it, I do genuinely enjoy it, and it gives us more to talk about. So it's a win all around. Yeah. Is there anything else from the interview that stood out to you? I do want to talk a little bit about that Summer of Superman special, but anything else that stood out to you that you wanted to follow up on?
Those were the two big pieces. If I had heard nothing else in that interview, the fact that he wants to give Superman that big graduation threshold puberty ceremony moment, and the fact that he wants Lois Lane to name him, I would have been happy if I got nothing else out of it. So, thanks for sharing that with me so I could talk more optimistically about what was coming. Because when I read that, I was like, oh, this is not for me. This is my jumping off point. But as I've often said about myself, I have been wrong about almost everything I have ever said. So I don't know. Maybe I would have come around and it would have been my favorite thing ultimately. But boy, after that first read, before that interview, I was trepidatious.
All right. Well, good. I'm glad it had that effect. And I have to say, I am very curious to hear reactions from folks about this prominent feature of Superboy in Action Comics. And certainly to our audience members, please reach out if you've already read Action 1087, or if and when you do, please let me know. But yeah, I'm really curious what the fan reaction will be to this full-fledged Clark as Superboy. I mean, this is not something we've had in this way, to this extent, in decades.
Right.
So I'm interested to see how this plays out and how people feel. I mean, it's here for me, and for those of us who followed along with our Superboy coverage, I think we were primed for it. But for the more general audience, I really wonder, and I hope it's well received, and it should be. It deserves to be. But I'm really curious.
I'm just thrilled to death that Mark Waid finally gets to write Action Comics, because I know that he's wanted to do that for forever. And after all he's given us and all the enjoyment he's given me as a big Mark Waid fan, I'm just pleased as punch that he gets to do what he wants to do.
Yeah. Now, not too long before Action 1087, we got to see Mark Waid's Clark as Superboy in the pages of the Summer of Superman special, which in the present day featured the wedding of John Henry Irons and Lana Lang. What'd you make of that issue?
I messaged you after that issue because knowing that you're a big Pete Ross guy, and the way they were talking in that issue, it really felt like she had never been married to Pete. I like John Henry Irons. I like Lana. I wish that they would have their own, what would you even call them? Because they're kind of secondary characters to some extent. So I want them to have their own tertiary characters. I want them to have their own D-list, C-list characters. Whereas now, like, they're just two secondary characters together. It's like, I don't like that Batman's Robin now is Batman's son.
Gotcha.
Okay, well then who's his son's supporting characters? Oh, his dad. When Tim Drake was Robin, we had all these other characters that came from Tim Drake, and now we don't. And in the same way, oh well, who's Lana's husband? Oh, it's Steel. Oh, and who's Steel's wife? It's Lana. It shrinks the universe, and I really don't like that tendency in comics in the last many years.
I hear you. One thing, though, that I am encouraged by, and maybe this will help solve what you just brought up a little bit and might also solve another issue we've talked about on the show, the amount of Superman family characters in Metropolis, because one of the things we get in that Summer of Superman special is this idea that John Henry and Lana are going to make Smallville their base of operations. So at least that helps spread out the super family a bit. And then my hope, I don't know exactly in what book or how frequently we're going to check in on them, but when we do, if they are set there, that opens up an avenue for their own supporting cast, which potentially could include Pete to some extent. Like you said, we see him sitting there at the wedding with presumably Clark Ross.
Presumably, none of that was clear just reading the issue. Did Clark Ross get a line of
No, neither of them had a line. They were sitting there silently in the audience, but they were there. And I will say, having now spoken to editor Paul Kaminsky on the show and Mark Waid, and bringing up this business about Pete Ross to both of them, and hearing their perspective on it, and the fact that he's a character of some importance to them as well. I trust that Pete is in good hands, and we'll get some good play for him. But yeah, I know I can't disagree. My heart did, as happy as I was that he was there at the wedding, just because it's some panel time for him. It was also, couched within watching Lana marry someone else and all of this talk about how John Henry is the one. But I'm curious to see where it goes. It was an intriguing starting point, at least. We had 3 chapters, each one written by one of the major Superman writers. So we had a chapter by Mark Waid, a chapter by Joshua Williamson, a chapter by Dan Slott, and we had Jorge Jimenez draw the issue. It looked fantastic. And it opens with that past chapter showing Clark as Superboy. And I did, and obviously this is coming from someone who watched 10 seasons of Smallville religiously. So you give me a little Clark Lana angst, I'm there. So, but just this idea of him trying to sort out his feelings, being so convinced she's the one. But then when he's having this whole time travel adventure with Validus, and he's seeing these glimpses of his future, he sees his older self married to not Lana, and it throws him. And one of the things we talked about when we went through all of those Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes stories last year was I've never been the biggest fan of the whole idea of the mental block. Like if he learns something about his future, I always kind of prefer the idea that either the Legion is able to hide it from him when he's in the future, or the historical records can't be trusted, or I don't know. I never really loved the idea of a mental implant, but I did like the way Waid played it here, where when Clark's time travel adventure is done, the specific details fade away like a dream, but the gut feeling remained, right? And he had this sense of like something was off with this idea of Lana. I like the way that played.
That's exactly how I read comics. Now as a dad with a 4-year-old and a 19-month-old, that's exactly how I feel.
Yeah.
There's not a mental block programmed in my brain, but yeah.
Yeah. No, so from my perspective, it was a fun issue. I think it's a good entry point. It was a fun way to kick off this whole quote unquote Summer of Superman. And yeah, as far as the Superboy of it all, I'm here for it. I wouldn't have been a year and a half ago, but I am. And the timing couldn't be better for me. So this is great. We'll be following
you
it.
really brought this about. You have you should accept all accolades for it manifesting this.
I mean, right? I really feel like it's too much of a coincidence now. But I'm glad for myself and for the audience. I'm really glad that we had all of those discussions about that. So to whatever extent our little community here is just that much more ready for something like this, I think that's cool. So is there anything else you want to say before we sign off here?
I think we've said it all.
Right on. Well, thank you for joining me for these wraparound segments. My thanks once again to Mark Waid for joining me. It was really an honor. When we were done, I had just about another minute or two with him. He told me a little bit more about new history of the DC universe. Very exciting. I'm really looking forward to that as well. And like we said, Josh, you'll be back with me next week for our collected edition wish list. So people definitely need to come back for that.
I can't wait for that. This is my obsession.
Yes. All right. So thank you, audience. As always, I always appreciate you tuning in. Come back next week. And until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Thank you. Support the show and receive exclusive content, including the spin-off podcast Beyond Metropolis, advanced listens, and more by becoming a member at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. My sincere thanks to all patrons. Subscribe, rate, and review today via your platform of choice, and continue the conversation by joining us on social media. Links are in the show notes. Flat Squirrel Podcast is also home to another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman, now covering the color era of the classic George Reeves series. Subscribe today.